City, September 1913. The Hudson River is gray, a churning graveyard of industrial waste, dead fish, and secrets. But on a humid Tuesday morning, near the weeds of the New Jersey shoreline, two young boys spot something unusual. It's a bundle, wrapped tightly in heavy brown butcher paper, bobbing in the dirty water. They think it's a treasure. Maybe bootleg liquor, maybe money. They drag it into the mud. They cut the twine. They peel back the soggy paper. It wasn't a treasure. It was the torso of a woman. 3 miles away, at St. Boniface Church on 47th Street, the air smells of frankincense and beeswax. A man stands at the altar. His back is to the congregation. His vestments are pristine, embroidered with gold. His voice is steady as he lifts the chalice high above his head. This is the chalice of my blood. To the hundreds of parishioners bowing their heads, Father Hans Schmidt is a shepherd, a man of God, a vessel of holy light. But God isn't the only one Father Schmidt talks to. And that chalice, it's not the only place he's tasted blood. That was Father Hans Schmidt, the only Catholic priest in American history to be executed for murder. And trust me, the road to the electric chair was paved with a lot more than just good intentions. We're talking about secret identities, counterfeit money rings, and a blood pact that would make Dracula blush. Before we step into the confessional, do me a huge favor. If you're digging the show, hit that follow button on whatever platform you're listening on right now. And if you want to help us out, metaphorically speaking, get away with murder, leave us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It helps other true fans find us. You can also stalk us on the socials at Homicidal Tendency on Instagram, which is kind of the main hub. You can also find us on Twitter/X at Homicidal Pod. And then you can also find us on Blue Sky and TikTok at Homicidal Tendency. It'll give you a behind the scene looks at what we do here, and you'll have some photos and some video from today's case. All right. Are you ready to meet the father? All right, then let's go to church. To understand the crime, you have to understand where we are. New York City, 1913. It's a city on the edge of a nervous breakdown. We're 1 year away from the Great War in Europe, but right now, New York is at war with itself. It's loud, it's dirty, and it's growing faster than it can handle. You look up and you see the future. The Woolworth building has just been finished, the tallest building in the world. It's a cathedral to commerce, piercing the clouds, proving that money is the new god in America. But look down on the street, it's a different story. The streets are a chaotic mix of old world and new world. You have horse-drawn carriages fighting for space with Model T Fords. The air smells like a mixture of gasoline, horse manure, and coal smoke. It's a city of soot. You can't wear a white shirt for more than an hour without it turning gray. And the people, they're pouring in. Ellis Island is processing thousands of souls a day. You have Italians, Irish, Jewish, and most crucial to our story, Germans. In 1913, the Germany community in New York was powerful. They have their own newspaper, their own beer halls, and their own churches. So it's a city within a city. And for a young immigrant girl like Anna Mueller, arriving from Austria with nothing but a suitcase, the city is terrifying. It's a monster. In this chaos, there's only one safe harbor. One place you are told to trust blindly, and that's the church. Specifically, St. Boniface on 47th Street. In a city of strangers, the priest isn't just a man, he's a king. He's a father. He's the bridge between you and God. But when Father Hans Schmidt opens the rector door and smiles, you don't ask questions, even when he asks you to keep a secret. So let's find out, who is Father Hans Schmidt? He was born on March 23rd in 1881 in Offenburg. It's a picturesque town in Bavaria, Germany. From a young age, Schmidt was just odd, or maybe he was more than odd. He was exhibiting textbook signs of psychopathy that would be recognized by modern criminologists immediately. As a boy, he didn't play soldiers. He hung around the local slaughterhouses. He was fascinated by the mechanics of death. Imagine a picturesque, deeply Catholic Bavarian town, steeple churches, cobblestone streets, and strict religious piety. But on the outskirts, there was a place that smelled of iron and death, the municipal slaughterhouse. While other boys played soccer or tag, young Hans and his friends played here. In the late 19th century, slaughterhouses weren't just hidden away in industrial zones like they are today. They were part of the town's rhythm. Children could walk by, look in, and watch the butchers work. For Schmidt, this wasn't just curiosity, it was a compulsion. He would stand there for hours, mesmerizingly watching the throats of cattle and pigs being slit. Psychiatrists later labeled Schmidt with hematolagnia as sexual attraction to blood. For most people, blood triggers disgust or fear. For Schmidt, it triggered arousal. He described the sight of fresh flowing blood as exquisite and holy. Because he was raised in a strict Catholic environment, his brain crossed the wires between violence and divinity. The church, this is the blood of Christ, holy and powerful. The slaughterhouse, this is the blood of the beast, real, warm, and visceral. If blood is God, then spilling blood is a godly act in Schmidt's logic. As a young teenager, Schmidt didn't just want to watch anymore, he wanted to participate. He reportedly stole or caught a live goose. He didn't just wring its neck, he slashed its throat, mimicking the butchers he idolized. As the bird died, he put his mouth to the wound and he drank the blood. He described the feeling as of immense power and sexual release. He felt he had absorbed the life force of the creature. Schmidt was part of a group of boys who shared this fascination. They formed a sort of secret society that centered around the slaughterhouse. In this context, violence became a way to bond with the other males. They dared each other to touch the blood, to taste it, to watch the animals die without flinching. This reinforces the idea for Schmidt that intimacy was linked to violence. His formative experiences were with other boys. They weren't about sports or friendship, they were about shared transgression and death. So it's rumored that this bonding and such not with the boys was sexual in nature, obviously because he had like this bloodlust and like sexualized lust and he got off on blood. So that's the formation of his bisexual tendencies. Despite his disturbing hobby, Schmidt was intellectually brilliant. He was fluent in multiple language and had a sharp physiological mind. This intelligence was his camouflage. He entered the seminary in Minsk, Germany. Even here, there were the cracks. He was arrogant. He argued with superiors about theology, specifically about the nature of sacrifice. He believed he had a special direct line to God that superseded the church's rules. He was ordained as a priest in 1906. The church was hungry for bright young men and overlooked his colorful background. He was assigned to a few parishes in Germany, specifically in the Diocese of Minsk. Almost immediately, reports started coming in. It wasn't just that his sermons were weirdly violent or intense, there were rumors of sexual impropriety. While the records from 1906 are sanitized, later investigations suggest he was involved with men in his parish or was involved with soliciting acts from prostitutes. There were also specific allegations of him molesting or acting inappropriate with choir boys. No one's surprised, right? There's also rumors that he may have been involved with a girl that was disappeared and was murdered from his hometown, but that was never substantiated. So instead of defrocking him or getting him psychiatric help, which didn't exist basically at the time, they did the classic geographic cure. They decided he was just stressed or misunderstood and he needed a fresh start. In 1908, his superior suggested or perhaps demanded that he leave Germany, and America was the dumping ground for problem priests. It was far away, and they were desperate for German speaking clergy, and they offered him a clean slate. Schmidt arrived in the US in 1909, but he didn't go straight to New York. He bounced around, leaving a trail of unease wherever he went. His first stop was St. John's Church in Louisville, Kentucky. He was assigned as an assistant pastor. He clashed violently with the older, more traditional pastor. Schmidt was insubordinate. He refused to follow the schedule, and he disappeared for hours at a time. The pastor wrote to the bishop saying, essentially, get this man out of my parish, and he only lasted a few months there. His second stop was St. Francis Church, and this was in Trenton, New Jersey. He was transferred to Trenton, same story. He was moody, arrogant, and prone to dark, brooding silences. It is believed that during this time, he started dabbling in the idea of money making. He was obsessed with the idea that a man of his intellect shouldn't be poor. He started researching engraving and printing at that time. And then in late 1912, he was transferred to St. Boniface in Manhattan. It was a cornerstone of the German Catholic community in New York. It was a busy working class parish. The head pastor was Father Braun, and he was older, overworked, and desperate for help. They needed a priest who could speak fluent German, handle the heavy workload of confessions and masses, and connect with a new wave of immigrants. When Schmidt walked through the doors, he checked every box. He was 31 years old, handsome, and carried himself with an air of sophisticated European authority. He wasn't just a parish priest, he was a scholar. He could quote philosophy. He spoke beautifully. To the working class immigrants of the neighborhood, he seemed like high society. Father Braun welcomed him with open arms. He gave Schmidt a nice room in the rectory and immediately trusted him. The congregation, they were mesmerized. Unlike the older, tired priest, Schmidt had energy. This is where the cracks do start to show, though, but some people misread them. Schmidt's sermons were, shall we say, intense. He didn't preach about charity or kindness. He preached about sacrifice, blood, and atonement. Instead of thinking this guy was creepy, the preachers thought, wow, is he holy? He's a mystic. There were reports that during Mass, he would sometimes freeze or stare at the crucifix with a look of ecstasy. The congregation thought he was having a spiritual vision. In reality, psychiatrists later argued that he was likely disassociating or fantasizing about the violence of the crucifixion. Despite the warm welcome, he didn't fit in perfectly with the other priests. He treated the other clergy as intellectual inferiors. He often skipped communal meals or refused to do the boring work like visiting the sick. He would often disappear for hours at night. He told Father Braun he was taking long walks to pray. In reality, he was likely scouting for his secret apartment or visiting the Tenderloin district. This is the part of the story where Father Schmidt stops being just a creepy priest and becomes a full blown criminal mastermind. Well, at least he thinks he is. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a calculated, expensive, and technically complex operation that required a secret headquarters. So Schmidt didn't want to do his dirty work at the rectory at St. Boniface. He needed a safe house. So he rented an apartment at 68 Bradhurst Avenue in Harlem. In 1913, Harlem was a mix of upscale Jewish and German immigrants and working class tenements. It was far enough uptown from St. Boniface that he was unlikely to bump into any of his parishioners, but he couldn't rent it as Father Schmidt. He signed the lease under a pseudonym, Dr. Emil van Dyck. He told the landlord that he was a wealthy doctor and inventor who needed a quiet place to work on his experiments. This wasn't just a place to sleep, it was a workshop. He moved in heavy furniture, he installed blackout curtains or heavy drapes to hide the light from his mostly late night work. And most importantly, he reinforced the floors to hold the weight of his new toy, a massive printing press. But Schmidt didn't do this alone. He needed a technical expert. Enter Dr. Ernest Moret. Moret was a dentist, but like Schmidt, he was a man with expensive taste and low morals. Schmidt was the brains of the operation, and Moret was the money man who helped fund the equipment. They met in the German immigrant circles of New York. Moret was likely the only person who knew both sides of Schmidt, the priest and the criminal. They bonded over their shared arrogance. They believed they were smarter than the U.S. Treasury. In 1913, counterfeiting was an art form. You couldn't just scan a bill, you had to recreate it. They decided to counterfeit the U.S. $10 silver certificate, often known as the jackass note because the eagle on it looked like a donkey when you turned it upside down. Schmidt claimed to have skills in engraving. He spent hours hunching over the copper and zinc plates, etching the intricate scrollwork of the bill by hand. The apartment smelled of acid and solvents. They used photo engraving techniques to transfer the image of the real bill onto the plates. They bought a legitimate printing press, a heavy cast iron beast that would have required significant effort to move it into a residential apartment without raising eyebrows. Despite their arrogance of all of this, they were bad at it. The ink was wrong, the paper felt different, the details were blurry. The irony of it, they spent months and hundreds of dollars setting this up, but they likely spent more money making the fake bills than the bills were actually worth. But we'll come back around to this later on. And we'll touch on that they were probably more than just business partners. They were reportedly also homosexual lovers, but we'll talk more about that later. But let's move on. Let's meet the second big player in this little play we're doing here. We're going to talk about Anna. In true crime, victims often get reduced to just the body. But Anna Muller was a real person with hopes and dreams who was systematically preyed upon. She was born in Austria in roughly 1892. By 1913, she was 21 years old. She was described as pretty and plump, which was a compliment in 1913, implying that she was healthy, and deeply, deeply devoutly Catholic. Like millions of others, she came to America for a better life. She arrived in New York City with very little money, limited English, and really no family or network. In 1913, in New York City, a young single immigrant woman was incredibly vulnerable. If you didn't have a husband or a father to protect you, you were prey. Your only safety net was your community, specifically your church. St. Boniface wasn't just a place to pray, it was an employment agency for German Catholics. Anna found work as a housekeeper at the rectory. This was considered a safe job. You weren't working in a dangerous factory or a sweatshop. You were working for priests. You were serving God by serving his servants. Domestic servants lived a lonely life, though. They lived in the house where they worked, this case, the rectory, worked 12 to 14 hours a day, and rarely went out except for Mass. Imagine the rectory kitchen. It's loud, it's hot, and it smells of cabbage and cleaning supplies. Anna's scrubbing the floors or peeling potatoes. Then enter Father Schmidt. He sweeps in, tall, handsome, wearing the pristine black cassock of a priest. He speaks High German, the language of the educated, while she speaks probably a rural dialect. He notices her. For a lonely immigrant girl, attention from the new, brilliant priest was overwhelming. He didn't just ignore her like the other priests might have. He spoke to her. He asked about her home. He made her feel seen. But this wasn't a blooming romance. It was a hostage situation in disguise as a love affair. To understand why Anna stayed and why she eventually died, you have to deconstruct the whole psychological cage Father Schmidt built around her. It was constructed of three things: isolation, authority, and twisted theology. Let's look at this quote unquote relationship. There's the imbalance. He's 31 years old, educated, wealthy by her standards, and a priest, meaning he held the keys to her internal soul. Her, she's 21, poor, uneducated, an immigrant with no family in this country. Schmidt didn't woo her with flowers, though. He wooed her with blasphemy. He convinced Anna that because he was a priest, he had a special dispensation from God. He told her that the ordinary laws of sin didn't apply to them. They were spiritual elites. God doesn't see us as sinners, Anna. He sees us as a divine union. Our love is higher than the church. Anna, a devout Catholic, was terrified of hell. Schmidt removed that fear. He became her conscience. If he said it was okay, it must be okay. The relationship had two modes: public silence and private fantasy. At St. Boniface, they were professional. They barely spoke. He was the master, she was the servant. This enforced silence likely created an intense pressure cooker of intimacy. The secrecy made it feel like us against the world. When they went to the secret apartment on Bradhurst Avenue, they stopped being Father Schmidt and the maid. They became Dr. and Mrs. Emile Van Dyke. He bought her nice clothes to wear only inside the apartment. They played house. He would work on his counterfeit plates and she would cook or sew. It was a simulation of domestic life they could never legally have. This is the most disturbing psychological milestone in the relationship. Schmidt couldn't marry her legally or in the church, so he invented a rite. In the dusty, ink smelling living room of the Harlem apartment, he performed a quote unquote wedding. He was the officiant. Well, he was obviously the groom. Anna was the bride. And the witness, God. He wrote out a marriage certificate on a piece of paper. He made her sign it. He signed it. It wasn't legal for reasons. It was to lock her in, though. By marrying her, he bound her to him with a spiritual chain. She couldn't leave him now. She was his wife in the eyes of God. It was the ultimate control tactic. Circling back around to Schmidt's history of perusing men in Germany and his alleged sexual fluidity, where does Anna fit in? So, theory one is she's the cover. Was she just a convenient quote unquote beard to make him look like a normal heterosexual man if he ever left the priesthood? Or was it theory two, the victim of opportunity? Schmidt was a sexual predator and sadist. Gender may have not have mattered as much as vulnerability. Anna was there. She was easy to control. And then theory three, the blood fetish object. Schmidt was obsessed with blood. Women, though, through menstruation and childbirth, offered a biological connection to blood that men didn't. Anna may have been less of a lover and more of the source of his dark obsessions. And then circling back around to his counterfeiting partner, it's the most significant evidence of his queer life having a relationship with him. While they were probably just business partners in crime, court testimony and police investigations revealed an intense, almost obsessive bond. They spent long nights alone in that Harlem apartment. In some accounts of his confession, Schmidt reportedly admitted that he enjoyed his relationship with Moret more than his relationship with Anna. Moret was his intellectual equal, his partner in crime, and most likely his lover. Anna was the pet or the servant. Moret was the partner. This fits the profile of a man who compartmentalized his life. Women were for service and blood rituals. Men were for companionships and intellectual equality. The fantasy did shatter in June 1913. Anna missed her period. Schmidt didn't panic immediately. He tried to fix it. He used his medical knowledge, which was non existent, to try and induce a miscarriage. He gave her toxic chemicals. He likely performed invasive, painful procedures on her in the apartment. When the baby didn't die, Schmidt realized the problem wasn't the pregnancy. The problem was Anna. This is the darkest chapter of the story. It's where the priest vanishes and the butcher takes over. It was late summer in New York. The city was stifling hot. Windows were open everywhere, which makes the silence of this crime even more chilling. Anna Mueller was in the apartment at 68 Broadhurst Avenue. She was relaxed. She likely had prepared a meal. She trusted him completely. She had no idea that earlier in the day, Schmidt had purchased a long butcher's knife and a fine tooth carpenter's saw. Schmidt arrived late, around midnight. Schmidt didn't kill her in rage. He killed her with the cold precision of a surgeon. He waited until she was vulnerable, either asleep or resting in the bedroom. He struck her first with a blunt object to stun her, to ensure that she wouldn't scream. While she was unconscious but still alive, he used the butcher's knife. He slashed her throat from ear to ear. This is the part that horrified the public. Schmidt later confessed that when the blood began to flow, he caught some of it in a cup and drank it. He claimed this was a communion directed by St. Elizabeth of Hungary, who he said appeared to him and demanded a blood sacrifice. He didn't just want her dead, he wanted her blood. In that moment, he wasn't a priest performing a rite, he was a predator feeding. The St. Elizabeth story might have just been madness, or it might have been the only way his broken mind could justify the thrill he felt. And now, this is where the medical background Schmidt claimed to have, which he didn't, comes into play. He drug her body to the bathroom. He used the carpenter saw and the knife. He didn't just hack at her, he systematically took her apart into 7 pieces: the head, torso cut in half, and arms and legs. He did this in the bathtub to let the blood drain. He used the water to wash the pieces. He was meticulously clean, wiping down the walls and the floor. He wanted no trace left behind. He wrapped the body parts in brown butcher paper and tied them with heavy twine. He wrapped the torso in a pillowcase. The disposal, It took him multiple trips. Imagine a priest dressed in civilian clothes carrying heavy, wet bundles out of a Harlem apartment building in the middle of the night. He had weighted the bundles with heavy rocks and pieces of metal, likely from his counterfeiting supplies, but he didn't calculate the physics of decomposition with the gases that build up in a decaying body. The weights, they weren't heavy enough. He threw the pieces into the dark water. He watched them sink, and he thought he was free. The most chilling detail isn't the blood, it's what he did next. He went back to the apartment. He finished cleaning the blood. He slept in the bed where he had killed her. The next morning, he went back to St. Boniface and he said Mass. He lifted that chalice of wine. He blessed the congregation, and he went about his day like nothing happened. This is the moment the perfect crime unraveled. It wasn't a brilliant detective who cracked the case. It was the physics of decomposition and two bored kids. Across the river from Manhattan lies Woodcliff, New Jersey. In 1913, this was a quiet, rocky shoreline, often used for fishing or dumping trash. It was far enough away from the city that Schmidt thought the secrets he threw there would stay buried. Two young boys, James Garrison and Thomas Ryan, were playing along the riverbank on a humid Friday afternoon. They spotted a large, heavy bundle bobbing in the tall grass near the water's edge. It was wrapped in heavy brown paper and tied with twine. Like any kids in 1913, they hoped it was something valuable, smuggled goods, bootlegged alcohol, or maybe just something cool they could sell. They dragged the waterlogged package onto the mud. It was heavy and smelled strange, sweet and rotting. They used a pocket knife to cut the wet twine. They peeled back the layers of brown paper. Inside, it wasn't a treasure. It was the upper torso of a woman. It had been severed at the neck and the waist. The arms were gone. The legs were gone. The torso itself, it was wrapped in a pillowcase and padded with soggy newspapers. The boys panicked and ran to the police. When the police arrived, they didn't just have a body, they had a roadmap. Schmidt had been arrogant. He assumed the body would never be found, so he didn't bother to destroy the packing materials. The torso was wrapped in a white pillowcase. Stamped on the fabric in red ink was the letter A. Police initially thought it stood for the victim's name. However, it was actually a laundry mark. It was a specific type of stamp used by commercial laundries for institutions, like the rectory. Also, it was high quality linen, not something a poor immigrant would own. This suggested the killer had money or status. Packed around the body to absorb the blood, there was wads of newspaper. They were German language newspaper. They were dated from the last week of August 1913. The killer was German, he lived in New York, and he read the news. This immediately narrowed the suspect pool from everyone in New York to the German community. The torso also had a distinct scar on the shoulder. This later would be crucial for identification. It matched the description of a surgery that Anna had undergone. Within 24 hours, this was the biggest story in New York. The papers dubbed it Hudson River Torso Mystery. The press went wild. Was it a ripper? A doctor gone mad? A gang hit? The police were under immense pressure. A dismembered white woman found near the city was a panic inducing event. They put their best detectives on it. The investigation into the Hudson River torso mystery wasn't just a standard police procedural. The investigation into the Hudson River torso mystery wasn't just a standard police procedural. It was a collision between the old world of superstitious panic and the new world of forensic science. The charge was Inspector Joseph Farrell, a legendary figure in the New York Police Department's history. He was the man who had introduced fingerprinting to America, earning him the nickname the American Sherlock Holmes. He didn't believe in monsters, he believed in evidence. His investigation hinged on a single mundane object, that pillowcase wrapped around the torso. Like we said, it was stamped with the letter A in red ink. And in 1913, commercial laundries used unique alphanumeric codes to sort bulk laundry from institutions like hospitals and churches. The A wasn't a monogram for a name, it was a route code. Perot ordered his detectives to visit every major laundry service in Manhattan and the Bronx. They carried the bloodshed, waterlogged pillowcase from shop to shop. A manager at a laundry in Harlem recognized the stamp. He identified it belonging to the Count of St. Boniface Church on 47th Street. Once the police had the location, they didn't kick the doors down immediately. They had to be careful. Accusing a Catholic Church of involvement when the dismemberment and a murder was a political minefield in 1913. Detectives watched the rectory. They noted who came and went. They discreetly interviewed neighbors and parishioners. They learned that a young housekeeper, Anna, had gone away suddenly. But the story didn't add up. Father Schmidt claimed that she had moved back to Austria, but she had left her trunk, her clothes, and her small savings behind. The police eventually traced Schmidt's movements to his secret apartment at 68 Bradhurst Avenue, and when they raided it, they found a crime scene that baffled them. The apartment reeked of chemicals, the ones they used for the counterfeiting, and they found the large butcher knife and the carpenter's saw that they saw Schmidt had bought days before the murder. The bathtub was suspiciously clean, but traces of blood were found in the cracks of the floorboards. To their shock, they also found the printing press, the plates, and the chemicals. Perot realized he wasn't just dealing with a killer, he was dealing with a professional criminal hiding behind the collar of a priest. It was late, near midnight. Police surrounded the St. Boniface rectory. Inspector Perot and his men, they didn't kick the door down. They knocked. They were entering the home of God, and despite the evidence, there was still a hesitation to manhandle a priest. They found Schmidt in his room. He was wearing his pajamas. He wasn't packing a bag. He wasn't praying. He was waiting. The first exchange between the two men. Perot. Father, we need to ask you about Anna. Schmidt. She's gone. Perot. We know where she is. We found her in the river. Schmidt. Then she's with God. They took him to police headquarters on Center Street. In 1913, interrogation rooms were theater. Think thick cigar smoke, harsh electrical lights, and the smell of sweat and will suits. Perot was famous for not beating his suspects. He used silence, logic, and relentless pressure. He sat across from Schmidt, looking for a twitch, a sweat bead, a sign of fear, but Schmidt gave him nothing. He sat with his hands folded in his lap, like he was hearing a confession rather than giving one. Perot expected denial. Most killers deny it until the evidence crushes them. Schmidt did the opposite. He owned it immediately, but he twisted it for the context. When Perot asked, "Did you kill her?" Schmidt replied, "I loved her. I killed her. I made a sacrifice of her. It was for the will of St. Elizabeth." Schmidt claimed that St. Elizabeth of Hungary, which apparently a distant relative of his, he claims, appeared to him in a vision. She told him that Anna's pregnancy was a sin, but their love was divine. The only way to purify the sin was through sacrifice. This is where the interrogation room went silent. Schmidt admitted that after he had slashed her throat, he drank a glass of her blood. He called it the Eucharist of love. This is where Perot's genius kicked in, though. He didn't buy the God made me do it act. He pivoted the questioning away from the murder and towards the counterfeiting. Perot, if you are a holy man acting on God's orders, why do you have a printing press? Schmidt, to make money. Perot, does St. Elizabeth need $10 bills? This is where Schmidt faltered. He tried to explain that the money was for a utopian colony he was going to build. Perot pointed out the preparation. He asked about the saw, the knife, and the brown paper bought days before the murder. Madness is impulsive. You plan this like a business transaction. You aren't crazy, Father. You're just cruel. The more unsettling part of the interrogation was Schmidt's demeanor after the confessing. After describing how he dismembered the woman he loved, Schmidt asked for breakfast. He ate a massive meal of steak, eggs, and coffee with gusto. Then he went back to his cell and slept like a baby. When reporters were allowed to see him, which happened back then apparently, he posed for photos. He smiled. He treated the murder investigation like it was a celebrity tour. The trial of Father Hans Schmidt wasn't just a legal proceeding. It was the O.J. Simpson trial of 1913. It had everything: religion, sex, blood, money, and a defendant who seemed to be auditioning for the role of his life. December 7th, 1913. The trial took place at the New York Supreme Court. Thousands of people lined up outside. The courtroom was packed, mostly with women. They were fascinated by the handsome monster. It was suffocating. Women fainted in the gallery. Vendors sold photo of Schmidt outside. It was mass hysteria. Schmidt entered wearing a lay suit. The church had stripped him of his clerical collar, though not yet officially defrocked him. He looked pale, detached, and he smirked at the reporters. Schmidt's lawyer, Alphonse Knoble, had only one card to play: insanity. He argued that Schmidt was a sexual maniac, suffering from schizophrenia. He wasn't a criminal, he was a broken vessel. Schmidt took the stand. This was unheard of, though. Usually, defense lawyers hid their crazy clients, but he put him front and center. Schmidt was electric. He described the visions of St. Elizabeth. He told the jury in graphic detail about slashing Anna's throat and drinking her blood to purify their love. He spoke about it with the religious ecstasy of a saint, not the remorse of a killer. A direct quote from him: "I did not kill her. I sacrificed her. It was a sacrament." On the other side of the aisle, District Attorney Charles Whitman, who would later become governor of New York because of this case, he had to prove that Schmidt was sane. Whitman didn't focus on the murder, he focused on the money. Gentlemen of the jury, a man who is crazy does not rent a secret apartment under a fake name. A man who is crazy does not buy specific acids to etch copper plates. A man who is crazy does not run a counterfeiting ring for profit. Whitman brought in Dr. Ernest Merritt, the dentist slash homosexual lover. Merritt testified that Schmidt was lucid, calculating, and obsessed with getting rich. This destroyed the whole wandering mystic image. And the prosecution inadvertently outed Schmidt, outed his secret. Testimony revealed that the apartment at 68 Broadhurst wasn't just a love nest for Anna, it was a hangout for Schmidt and Moret. They spent hours there alone. The prosecution hinted at the letters found in Schmidt's trunk from men in Germany. They were affectionate letters. They suggested blackmail or other past lovers. The insanity about the blood sacrifice might have been just a cover for a much simpler motive. Anna was pregnant, and her baby threatened Schmidt's comfortable secret life with his male friends and his money schemes. Everyone expected a guilty verdict immediately, but the jury came back deadlocked. 10 jurors voted guilty, 2 jurors voted not guilty by reason of insanity. Schmidt's performance had worked. 2 jurors believed that no sane man could cut up a woman and then calmly eat breakfast. They bought the religious mania act. Imagine the outrage in New York City. A priest confesses to butchering a girl, and he almost walks free because he acted crazy enough. Then we get to the retrial, January 19th through the 30th, 1914. There was a strategy shift. The prosecution didn't make the same mistake twice. They went harder on the premeditation. They brought in shopkeepers who had sold him the saw and the knife days before the murder. They proved he had planned the sacrifice on a Tuesday, bought the tools on a Wednesday, and killed her on a Thursday. Psychiatrists testified that Schmidt was faking his symptoms. They pointed out that he only acted crazy when the jury was looking. This time, it took the jury less than an hour. Guilty of murder in the first degree. The sentence: death by electrocution. When the verdict was read, Schmidt didn't scream. He didn't pray. He stood up, bowed politely to the judge, and thanked his lawyer. The crazy eyes, they vanished. The mystic voice, it disappeared. He was back to being the cold, arrogant priest. For many, this was the final proof. The St. Elizabeth story was just a script he had written, hoping to save his own skin. In the end, Father Schmidt's greatest sin wasn't the murder, it was the arrogance. He thought he could outsmart the law, the church, and the jury. He thought he could act his way out of the electric chair. But the jury saw past the performance. They didn't see a madman. They simply saw a man who ran out of lives. The press didn't just report on Father Hans Schmidt, They created him. In 1913, New York was in the golden age of yellow journalism, a ruthless battle for circulation between William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer. The case was a gift from the gods of chaos, a priest, a secret lover, and a dismembered body, and a vampire confession. It was the first true tabloid trial of the 20th century. The newspapers turned the case into a serialized horror novel. They didn't care about the alleged crimes, they wanted monsters. They branded Schmidt with names that sounded like comic book villains: the vampire priest, the monster in vestments, the Satan of the sanctuary, the tunic angel. 1913 was just 1 year before World War I. Anti German sentiment was rising. The press leaned heavily into his German heritage, painting him not just as a killer, but as a foreign menace, corrupting American morals. On the day of his arrest and during the trial, papers released multiple editions a day. Newsboys on the corners were screaming, "Read all about the priest, the blood drinker. Read all about it, buddy." In 1913, they couldn't print gruesome crime scene photos, so they hired artists to draw them. Papers published detailed floor plans of the apartment at 68 Bradhurst Avenue. They marked the bed where Anna had died and the bathtub where she was cut up with X's, turning the crime scene into a tourist map. Artists also drew dramatic, shadowy sketches of Schmidt drinking from the chalice, cementing the blood sacrifice narrative before the trial even began. For the Catholic Church in America, this was a PR nuclear bomb. The Archdiocese of New York immediately went into lockdown. They didn't defend Schmidt, they didn't offer him legal counsel. St. Boniface Church tried to erase him. Parishioners were harassed on the street. People would cross the street to avoid walking in front of the murder church. While never officially admitted, this case led to a much stricter vetting process for foreign priests entering the U.S. Bishops became terrified of wandering priests with no paper trails. Before Schmidt, claiming God told me to do it was a viable insanity defense. Juries were superstitious, but Schmidt ruined that. The fact that he was executed despite his quote unquote visions set a hard legal precedent in New York. Preparation proves sanity. If you buy us all, you aren't crazy, no matter how many voices you hear. This case cemented Inspector Farrow's reputation. It proved that science was more reliable than confession. It moved police work from beating it out of them to proving it in the lab. The Schmidt case changed how Americans viewed the clergy, though. Before 1913, the idea of a priest being a killer was unthinkable to the average Irish or German Catholic immigrant. Schmidt proved that the collar didn't make a man holy. The killer priest became a staple of pulp fiction and radio dramas in the 1920s and 30s. Schmidt is likely the inspiration for countless fictional villains who hid behind the religion. The media didn't care about Anna Mueller. In millions of words written about the case, she was rarely described as anything other than the victim or the seductress. The press was so obsessed with the monster, they forgot about the girl. Now we get to the final act of the tragedy. Father Hans Schmidt's execution was a spectacle that the public had been waiting for 2 years. It was the only time in American history that the state executed a Catholic priest. Sing Sing Prison, 1914 to 1916. Schmidt was sent to Sing Sing Prison to await the electric chair. On death row, the crazy act vanished completely. He was calm, polite, and spent his time writing letters and reading philosophy. He stopped talking about St. Elizabeth and blood sacrifice. He became a model of stoicism. Once he realized the insanity plea failed, he dropped the mask. There was no point in pretending anymore. He reverted to his true self, the arrogant intellectual. Just weeks before his date, he tried to feign insanity again. He wrote bizarre letters to the governor claiming to be the Emperor of Germany. The doctors examined him one last time. They concluded he was faking it very poorly. The governor, he refused clemency. February 18th, 1916. It was a cold Friday morning. Schmidt didn't want a feast. He reportedly only drank coffee and ate a small amount of bread. This is crucial. Before he died, he met with the prison chaplain. He made a full confession. He admitted that the St. Elizabeth story was a lie. He admitted there was no vision. He killed Anna because he loved her too much and because she was an obstacle. He dropped the supernatural pretenses and died a sinner, not a saint. At 5:48 a.m., the guards they came for him. Schmidt was dressed in the standard black prison uniform. His head was shaved for the electrodes of the electric chair. He walked to the chair without help. He was incredibly calm. Sing Sing's electric chair was nicknamed Old Sparky. It was terrifying. It was a wooden contraption with leather straps and heavy electrodes. There were about 30 witnesses, including reporters and doctors. It was silent. This is the most chilling part. Everyone expected a final rant about the blood of God. Instead, he reverted to the church. As they strapped him in, he looked at the crucifix held by the chaplain and said clearly, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, have mercy on my soul. And then, as the hood was placed over his head, Father, forgive me. 5:53 a.m. The executioner threw the switch. 2,000 volts of electricity surged through his body. Smoke rose from the electrode on his leg. Doctors checked his heart. He was pronounced dead at 5:58 a.m. In 1916, science was obsessed with the criminal brain. They believed you could find physical proof of evil in the brain tissue. His body was taken to the prison morgue. Doctors removed his brain to study it. They were looking for lesions or deformities that would explain his bloodlust. They found nothing. His brain, it was normal. Science wanted a monster. They wanted a deformed lobe or scar that could say, well, here's the evil. But Father Schmidt's brain, it was just like yours or mine. The evil wasn't in the tissue, it was in the man. Because he died a confessed Catholic, he was allowed a burial. He was buried in the prison cemetery at Sing Sing in a grave marked only with his prison number, 65138. The church, eager to forget him, erased them from their history books. St. Boniface Church still stands on 47th Street today, but you won't find a plaque for Father Schmidt. Father Hans Schmidt went to the chair praying for forgiveness, but as the smoke cleared in the death chamber, one question remained. Was he a madman who heard the voice of God, or was he just a man who thought he was God? The church buried him, the state executed him, but the questions, they float, just like that bundle in the river. If you enjoyed the deep dive into the darkest confessional in history, please rate, review, and subscribe to Homicidal Tendency on your platform of choice. Share this episode with a friend who thinks priests are a little too quiet, because in this case, they're right. I'm Matt. Keep your holy water handy, lock your doors, and remember, sometimes the monster isn't hiding under the bed. Sometimes he's the one staying masked.